This man murdered 16 people in just over 1 week. 11 of those were either his children or grandchildren. My name's Emma, this is Tiki Bar True Crimes, and I'd like to tell you the case of Ronald Gene Simmons. Ronald Simmons was born in Chicago in 1940 to his father William and mother Loretta. William Simmons died when Ronald was just 3 years old of a stroke. Loretta, his mother, quickly remarried another William Griffin, who was a civil engineer in the US Army. Because of his position, they moved to Arkansas. They subsequently travelled all over central Arkansas for the next 10 years because of his stepfather's position. Ronald was 17 when he dropped out of school and he joined the Navy. When he was serving, he met and married a young lady named Rebecca. They went on to have 7 children, including a little girl called Sheila, who Ronald was obsessed with. They moved to New Mexico, where they started a new life. Ronald hated going away on duty and particularly hated leaving his little girl Sheila. He left the US Navy for a couple of years and then returned to join the US Air Force. He won many awards for his service and was a very well-respected military man. From the outside, this family looked like your standard American family. The father is in military service, the mother goes to church and looks after their children. However, this was far from a happy home. Ronald had a very odd reputation in New Mexico. People thought he was a little strange. One of Sheila's friends said that whenever she went round their house, he would be sitting in this same little dark room with a beer. It was really spooky and it stank. Then in 1981, neighbours see Ronald give Sheila a inappropriate kiss goodbye. This isn't a peck on the cheek as she was leaving. This was more of a romantic, inappropriate father-daughter kiss. They mention something to the school, who usher Sheila in to see a counsellor. There she breaks down and admits that she is pregnant with her father's child and that he has been SAing her for years. So this obsession that Ronald had with his baby girl Sheila had turned into a very inappropriate, abusive relationship. Charges are filed against him, and what does he do? He freaks out. He doesn't want to be arrested. He doesn't want his family taken away from him. So he packs up his entire family, his wife, his 7 children, and they disappear. Now, they kind of go missing for a couple of years. No one really knows where they are. And then they end up on this derelict land in Dover, Arkansas. They are miles away from the town. It is very remote, wooded, and Ronald has put together these 2 old mobile homes. He sort of attached them to make one big home, which is where the family will live. This place has no plumbing, no telephone. It's just a piece of land. There's no electricity, there's no water supply, there's no gas supply. It's remote. It's just what he wanted. So for plumbing, what do? He makes his children dig a cesspit at the far end of this land so that they can put their waste into it. He builds a fence around the entire property with barbed wire. Some of it is over 10 feet tall. A clay drive that leads up to these mobile homes is really hard to kind of navigate, especially when it's snowy or icy. He makes it really difficult for anyone to get anywhere near them. Scattered along this driveway are signs saying no trespassing. He's making this place as unfriendly as possible. There's also old scrap cars on blocks everywhere. There's just junk all around the land, which Ronald passes off as building materials. This was Ronald's fortress. He had trapped his family in this place. They couldn't really communicate with anyone. He was king, and he actually called it his kingdom of Mockingbird Hill. So him and his entire family are now living in this shack, this remote location where no one can really touch them. And the charges that were filed against him were dropped just because they disappeared. I mean, to me, that's bizarre. They knew that a daughter had been impregnated by her father, and they just dropped them just because they couldn't find them, or they just went out of town. So he's done it. He's escaped. His children that were of school age did actually attend school, and they caught the bus on time. The teachers said they never noticed anything unusual about them. Their behaviour was impeccable. They didn't excel academically, but they weren't particularly behind either. Ronald never allowed his children to go over to any of their friends' houses. He also never allowed any friends to come to theirs. They weren't allowed to go to any school functions, so they literally got on the bus, went to school. When school was finished, they came straight home. After everything comes out, the teachers are questioned, and they said that the children were always clean. However, they didn't really know the Simmons children, which is really odd because this is a small town. We're talking under 400 families live here. It's a small town, it's a small school. So how did these teachers not really know these children? How were these children raised in such a bizarre lifestyle that it was never flagged by social services? Ronald's wife, Rebecca, often attended the local church, and friends afterwards did say that she did try to leave Ronald on many occasions. However, she didn't really have much money. She didn't have a phone. They often noticed that she would have bruises on her, particularly her face and her neck. Ronald had trapped her, and it was very difficult for her to leave. He wanted to be king of his family, and that's what he ensured. Ronald himself had some low-paying jobs in town, and he also got a job as a clerk at Woodline Motor Freight. However, he became infatuated with a lady who worked there called Kathy Kendrick. She did not feel the same way and actually reported him for inappropriate sexual behaviour. He was dismissed, and he went and got a job at a local mini-mart, which he stayed there for around about 18 months before he quit on December the 18th, 1987. At this point, there are now only 7 people living in those old mobile homes. We have Ronald and his wife Rebecca, and just 5 of the children. 2 of the older children, Billy and Sheila, had moved out, married, and had children of their own. So Ronald and Rebecca are now grandparents. So it's around this time, after he quits his job at the local mini-mart, that he decides that he is going to annihilate his entire family. On December the 22nd, 1987, he goes to Walmart and buys a .22 caliber handgun. When he returned home, his 26-year-old son Gene and wife Rebecca were there preparing for Christmas. He proceeded to bludgeon and shoot them to death. He just left their bodies lying on the floor, didn't do anything with them, as he went after his 3-year-old daughter Barbara. He proceeded to strangle her to death and then wrap her in black plastic bags. With his 26-year-old son, his wife and his 3-year-old daughter's bodies just lying on the floor, he proceeds to just sit on the sofa, kick back and have a beer. After having a beer, he decides the best thing to do is to carry these bodies and throw them into the cesspit. This is the cesspit that he forced his children to dig. So essentially, his children have dug their own grave. Not only that, he has killed family members and then proceeds to shove them in the same place where you put sewerage. After hauling these bodies down and disposing of them in the cesspit, he goes back to the mobile home and sits and waits for his other children to return from school. This is their last day before Christmas break. When they arrive, he tells them to all go into their rooms, and he's got a really exciting surprise for them. They all run in thinking they're going to get an early Christmas present, and he's going to call them out one by one to deliver it. He starts with 17-year-old Loretta. He proceeds to strangle her, and when she falls unconscious, to make sure that she is definitely deceased, he goes outside and holds her head into one of the barrels full of rain until she drowns. He then called out his 14-year-old son Eddie, his 11-year-old daughter Marianne, and 8-year-old Becky, and proceeded to do the exact same thing to them. They would come out all excited, thinking they were going to get an early Christmas present. He would then proceed to strangle them until they were unconscious he would take them outside and then proceed to hold their head in this rain barrel until they had passed away. These children, who all thought they were going to get a lovely Christmas present, were brutally murdered by their father. Their bodies dumped in the cesspit that they were forced to dig, just discarded like trash. All the family members that were living in that mobile home are now deceased, their bodies in the cesspit. He proceeds to just kick back over the Christmas holidays for a few days, watch TV, have a few beers, enjoy the silence, and he waits until Boxing Day, which is when the other family members are due to arrive. First to arrive is his son Billy with his wife Renata and their 1-year-old son Trey. Ronald is sat waiting for them to arrive with a handgun, and the minute they enter that mobile home, he proceeds to shoot his son Billy and daughter-in-law Renata. This is all done in front of their 1-year-old son Trey. He then grabs Trey and proceeds to do what he did with the other children. He strangles him until he's unconscious, places his head in the rain barrel until he's passed away. He then lines these bodies up in the living room and continues to wait. Just 1 hour later, Ronald's daughter Sheila arrives with her husband Dennis, along with their daughter Sylvia, who is actually the product of incest and the abusive relationship between Sheila and her father, as well as their little son Michael, who is just 1 year old. When they enter, Ronald immediately shoots Sheila and Dennis and then proceeds to grab Sylvia, strangle her until she's unconscious, and again drown her in the rain barrel outside. He does the same to little Michael. He now has 7 family members' bodies in this mobile home, and he proceeds to line them up in neat rows and cover them with coats. The only one he does something slightly different to is Sheila, and he kind of lays her out as if this was kind of like a formal viewing and puts his wife's best tablecloth over her rather than a coat. He goes down to the cesspit and proceeds to just pour kerosene over all of the bodies. He does this because he thinks it will stop the smell coming up and therefore possibly raising people's suspicions and also the interest of animals. So this man has now murdered his entire family, all 14 members of them. And what does he do? He goes into town to pick up the Christmas presents that his wife had pre-ordered from the store. He thinks if someone doesn't pick these up, it's gonna arouse suspicion. Who doesn't collect Christmas presents for their children around Christmas time? He then goes to a local bar, hangs out there, has a few drinks, comes back home, and again just sits and watches telly, just chills out, enjoys his time off, no work, no kids, no wife, just completely oblivious to the absolute horror scene that is surrounding him. These bodies, these 7 bodies, are still just laying around the home. On Monday the 28th, so this is 2 days after he murdered the family members who weren't living in the home, filled with anger and resentment, he goes to his previous employer where Kathy Kendrick works, the lady who he was obsessed with. He shoots 24-year-old Kathy and she dies. He then proceeds to go to an oil company with the intention of killing the owner, Rusty Taylor, who also owns the mini-mart that he used to work at. He shoots and wounds Rusty but doesn't kill him. He does, however, murder a complete stranger, James Chaffin. He then went on to wound 3 more people and ended up at Woodline Motor Freight Company, where he says to his secretary, "You best call the police." He's done. His 40-minute rampage is over. He's sort of done what he wanted to do. He's exhausted, and he sits and just chats to the secretary like nothing has happened. He's just wounded and killed some people, and he's just sitting, chatting, just waiting for the police to arrive. The police do arrive, they arrest him, and they're taking him in for questioning. When he's questioned, the comments he makes about his family arouse a lot of suspicion with police, who then decide to go up to this place where they were all living and search. When they get there, they immediately are greeted by this horror scene when they look in the cesspit. So previously, the police just believed that maybe this guy got a little bit angry because he was like fired and he went around town wielding a gun and had horrifically injured and murdered some people. But then when they get to the property and see what else he has done, this horrifies them, and it horrifies the entire town as well. They find this mass grave of bodies just dumped in a cesspit along with sewage. They find more bodies neatly in a row in the mobile home that they were living. He was charged with 16 counts of murder and deemed fit to stand trial. His first trial was for the murder of Kathy Kendrick, the woman he was infatuated, and the complete stranger at the other workplace, James Chaffin. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. When he was sentenced, he made this statement: "I want it to be known that it is my wish and my desire that absolutely no action by anybody be taken to appeal or in any way change this sentence. It is further respectfully requested that this sentence be carried out expeditiously." He then went on trial for the murder of his 4 family members, and during this trial it came out that Rebecca was trying to leave. She was trying to save money for divorce proceedings. The prosecutor also presented a letter that had been discovered from Ronald to Sheila, berating her. It was full of anger at revealing that she was pregnant with his child, telling her that he would go see her in hell. When this was disclosed, Ronald got extremely angry, tried to punch the prosecutor and grab a local officer's gun. He was immediately removed from the courtroom. He was found guilty of all 14 counts of murder on February the 10th, 1989. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Again, he accepted this sentence and refused to appeal it, stating, "To those who oppose the death penalty, in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment." Whilst on death row, Ronald actually had to be separated from other inmates. Because of his decision not to appeal, other inmates believed that this would hinder their chances of success in appealing their own verdicts. Therefore, they constantly threatened Ronald's life. He was not safe there at all. On May the 31st, 1990, the Arkansas governor, which was actually Bill Clinton at the time, signed his death warrant. And on June the 25th, 1990, he was executed. None of his surviving relatives claimed the body, and he was subsequently buried in a potter's field. To this day, his motive is still unknown. People can guess, but no one really knows why he did what he did. I think the bigger question is how these children went so unnoticed. How could this family live and work in such a small town and no one recognise or highlight their dysfunctionality? How could a school see these children every single day and not recognise any emotional, psychological damage? I think this brings to light that we believe agencies can see these things and we put our trust in them, but it's not always obvious. And because of this, tragedies like this one do occur and will continue to occur because some of these signs go unnoticed. That was the case of Ronald Gene Simmons. If you like my content, please remember to like, subscribe and comment. Next time I will hopefully be back in the tiki bar. It was seriously windy today and the camera kept falling over, so I gave up. If you have any suggestions for cases, please let me know and I will see you in the next one. As child, but oh god no.